Hi everybody, Ninja Mama here. Today I want to tackle the topic that I believe is the root of many of our problems, how we found ourselves entrapped in narcissistic and otherwise manipulative relationships. And the root cause, I believe, is our tendency toward people-pleasing. If you've watched any of Ross Rosenberg's videos, I recommend checking some of those out. He speaks more on along the lines of codependency, narcissistic type dynamic, what is he called? The human magnet syndrome is the name of his book. And it makes perfect sense because a manipulator is naturally going to be more attracted to somebody who's going to have a tendency toward people pleasing. So he talks a lot about that dynamic. And but I'm going to read a couple of articles today that I found. So this one's going to go long. And that's okay. I know a lot of us enjoy the long videos. I myself do. You know, I like watching, or a lot of times I just listen to it, stick my iPhone in my pocket and walk around doing my chores and listen to someone speak about narcissistic abuse recovery. And you know, I listen to other topics as well sometimes. But so just, yeah, be forewarned, this one's going to go long. The first article I'm reading from is from a blogger by the name of Jeff Finley. I'm going to leave a link to the article, and this is from a man's perspective, but I think pretty much everything he says is pretty universal, regardless if you're a man or a woman. And you're going to relate, because I think most of us here are people pleasers and have a tendency to fall into that trap. And basically what it is you fall into this mental trap of regulating your self-worth by what you can do for other people. You feel like you're not worth anything unless you're helping someone else, or unless you're giving people what they want. Then you feel like you're a good person. And then if you take too much time for self-care, then you feel bad, you feel selfish, you feel guilt. There's many different environmental factors in one's life, whether it's upbringing, whether it was being in an abusive relationship, or it could be a work situation, or a situation with maybe a manipulative friend, that causes us to fall into this mental trap of constantly putting others first and ignoring our own needs, to the point where some people pleasers end up becoming overexhausted and just literally just physically ill because they're overdoing it and not taking enough time out for self-care. You fall into this dynamic of placing your self-worth in making other people happy. Many of you are not going to want to hear this. It is a little uncomfortable, you know, when I came to this realization myself, but it's sort of the same root as what causes the narcissist to behave the way they do. And what I'm talking about here is what is referred to in the psychological community as having an external locus of control. And what that means is, instead of finding what makes you happy, what makes you tick, finding out who you are from within. And what that means is listening to your own intuition and letting your intuition be your number one guide. You look for outside validation constantly, to the point where you ignore your own intuition and shut it down to a point where it withers and atrophies, and then you find yourself not even knowing who you are. You don't even know yourself because you've spent so much time focusing on other people's reactions to you. So that's something that we actually have in common with the narcissist. The split, the difference comes where people pleasers tend to have a higher moral standard than a narcissist, where we have an unhealthy level of focusing on other people's reactions to us, but it's because we have intense anxiety and fear of being perceived as a bad person. Not because we're only worried about our image, but because we don't want to be a bad person. The narcissist, on the other hand, does get stuck in the mindset of image and wanting to be perceived as a good person, but they don't care what means have to be used in order to get the reaction that they're seeking. So if they have to lie, if they have to be fake, if they have to actually commit a crime to get what they're seeking from other people, they will do it by any means necessary. And oftentimes with a narcissist, it's about control and domination, and they want to dominate. They get their self-worth off of being able to dominate others. So that's the reaction that they're seeking. That's their supply. They get their self-validation, their self-worth off of being able to dominate others, get people to come to their side, being able to get people to do nice things for them, being able to manipulate people into giving them what they want and they need, and they just disregard the other people's wants, needs, desires, and feelings. Whereas with the people pleaser is excessively focused on giving others what they want, what they need, focusing on other people's feelings, and then the people pleaser ignores his or her own wants, needs, feelings, and desires. So that's where the difference occurs. Okay, so on to the article. This is on jefffinley.org, I believe. I'm going to leave a link to the article in the description box. And the title of this blog post is Saying No and Setting Boundaries Without Being Mean. I love the title. He says, I've always had a hard time saying no. When someone needs something, I don't really want to. I don't really want to, but I just need to suck it up and do it. I'm sorry, I think I missed something. Let me start over. I've always had a hard time saying no. When someone needs something and they ask me, I'm happy to help. Sometimes I don't really want to, but I just need to suck it up and do it. Even if I'm overworked, someone else is in need, and things would run smoother if I just help them out. It's the right thing to do. If I say no, then I'm lazy, selfish, and uncooperative. Saying yes has been the default answer for years. Sometimes I really want to say no, like when I'm asked for just one small thing, and it's a lot easier for me to say yes than actually say no and explain why. It creates a ton of inner conflict in me. I know all of us can relate to that statement. I'm so used to saying yes that I feel like I can be quite a pushover. I don't want to make someone else mad or unhappy by refusing to help them out. This is a dominant characteristic of nice guy syndrome. I've learned I'll say sure and then figure out a way to do it. After all, my feelings are my feelings. I'll deal with them on my own and try to come to terms with this new obligation. Saying yes when you mean no. Last week, I realized I'm continually tested to say no. I said yes to something I really wanted to say no to. I even battled it out in my head and just decided to say yes against my better judgment. I was pissed at myself. I was trying to avoid conflict and avoid having to explain why I was being a dick by saying no. I didn't want the extra stress, so I just did it anyway. Ugh. Again, nice guys like me think that by saying no they are jerks. It's not that black and white. Why is it so hard to say no? I came across this article on Tiny Buddha that talked about listening to your intuition, and there's a link in his blog post to if you want to read that article. I could relate a lot with the idea of having to get up and go for a walk because I didn't know how to respond to an email. I was angry that I was once again going against what I wanted to please another person. I've learned that it's because I just don't have good boundaries. Proper boundaries as a life lesson. Boundaries is a word to describe where you draw the line. It's about being confident in yourself and knowing when to say no. Stand up for yourself or choose what you allow into your life. I kind of allow everything that comes my way in to some degree. It's like Swiss cheese boundaries. No good. Coincidentally, I ordered an astrological analysis of my birth chart, and it actually described the softness as inherent in my personality. It said that this lack of boundaries can be good in that it makes me empathetic, and I can easily understand other people's struggles. This makes me a great healer. But it also warned that establishing healthy boundaries is a life lesson for me. Where do lousy boundaries come from? When we were kids, it was our job to obey authority. Parents, teachers, police officers, etc. In a typical interaction with mom and dad, what we wanted was often not what our parents wanted. Sometimes when we would express our desires, we were told we were bad and were shamed. We might have been told it was selfish. Then we felt lots of shame around the idea of being selfish, that being selfish was good and being selfless was good and selfish was bad. Being selfish meant that you only cared about yourself and you treated others like dirt to get what you want. You saw selfish people in your life and you wanted to be nothing like them. He's such a good dude. As an adult, I ended up building a reputation of being a quote, unquote, really good dude. I mean, I had my own selfish desires for fame and fortune growing up, but I kind of felt bad when I achieved them. I didn't want people to think I was selfish. I would make sure to downplay the attention and help out other people when asked. I'd always be nice and caring. I didn't want to become a narcissist or an egotistical jerk. But here's the catch. And he has, in brackets, he has tweet. Worrying other people will think that you're selfish if you say no is actually very selfish in itself. You are concerned with your self-image. You are concerned people will think you're mean and uncaring, which you are not. You are a good person. So you have to uphold the image of being good. Otherwise, you could lose credibility or esteem. You could lose family, friends, and you'd be alone. You'd be unloved. Don't leave me, please. Here we are at the concept of being unloved, the core of so many adult issues. When we were kids, we received love when we were good and were punished or ignored when we were bad. We listened and obeyed to get the approval of others so we would get attention and be loved. When I was a teenager, I felt that being nice was a virtue, so I made sure to be really nice to girls, but I couldn't understand why none of them asked me out, and they all dated losers who seemed mean and inconsiderate. How could the girls fall for such bullshit? This is such a common problem with nice guys. Not guys who are nice, but self-identified nice guys with a capital N-G. Turns out being nice was helping me build great friendships, just not any dates. And my relationships with people were quite friendly and good. In my career, I was trusted and admired. I never missed a deadline or displeased a customer. It's not that I didn't have principles, it's just that my principles were being nice, generous, loving, kind, and caring, even if it went against my own well-being. I was the opposite of any bullies and mean jerks I grew up with, so I hung my hat on that and took pride in my goodness. Okay, now he's working into the part of people pleasing where it becomes really, really detrimental in your own life. And he titles this section, Spread Thin. As I get older, though I started to feel resentment, as I got older though, I started to feel resentment build up inside, like a sense of unfairness, that the more I achieved, the more people wanted pieces of me in my time. My principle of being nice was spreading me thin. I was saying yes to too many things and didn't actually know how to say no. I felt like I had to choose sides. My work, my band, my wife, my festival, my friends, they all wanted my time, and whoever tugged the hardest got my time at the expense of others. It seemed I was always in the middle. I could only say no when I had a good, verifiable reason that took my own free will out of the equation, like, oh, I already have plans that night with so-and-so, or I would love to, but we just can't afford it, or crap, I wish I could, but I'm out of town. But if I didn't have an excuse, it was just me having to make the decision, and that was really hard to do when I know that saying no would make them unhappy or upset. That's what happens when you don't have a sense of responsibility to yourself. A year of personal development focus has alerted me to this. When you live for validation and approval of others, even unconsciously, poor boundaries and resentment result. You'll be stuck in the middle. Standing up for myself. I finally got pissed at myself for letting it happen one more time. That's it. No more Mr. Nice Guy. I'm no longer going to be so nice. Well, not so fast. I can still be nice without sacrificing my ideals. I can still say no without damaging my relationships. I can still say no and actually get respect. By saying no, people actually feel safe around me. Besides, who wants a relationship with people who take and take but never give? If you have read Robert Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, I really recommend it. While you're at it, read Way of the Superior Man as well. And then he also leaves a link that is on how nice guys are really not so nice. Being able to say no confidently requires solid boundaries. To have solid boundaries, you need to love yourself and stop seeking validation or approval externally. The more I do this, the less fear there is around denying a request. Some tips on boundaries. Start becoming aware every time you say yes when you mean no. Notice what you are really seeking when you say yes. Is it approval? Practice self-love and appreciation every day. Spend time with people who have good boundaries. Find validation within by connecting with your spirit. Make your boundaries clear to others. You can be polite. Know your purpose. Live your truth. That's your integrity. Let your heart, not your ego, be your guiding light. And I would personally say that that's one of the most important tips to focus on in asserting your boundaries. If you follow your core values and follow your heart and your intuition, the rest just kind of naturally falls into place. And you're going to become stronger with asserting those boundaries, and then the manipulators are going to kind of fall out of your life, because once they see you have stronger boundaries and you're not willing to lay your core beliefs and values to the side in order to give them what they want, they're going to move on to somebody else that they can manipulate more easy. Wait, I lost my place. If you used to say, I should do this or they'll be mad, it's a good sign of poor boundaries. Following your joy will help you discover your purpose. Focus on your personal development as a human being. Spend some time alone. Take a solo vacation. I think spending time alone is very important for those of us who are introverts. And I don't believe that all people pleasers fall into the introvert category. There's lots of extroverted people pleasers out there too, who end up getting manipulated and taken advantage of, and end up getting abused. So this is not an introvert extrovert thing, but I would say especially for those of us who are introverted, it's very, very important to have time alone to recharge. And then the last tip he has is, don't act out of obligation, but out of genuine desire. So that was Jeff Finley's blog post. I really enjoyed that one. That was a good one. He hit on all the keynotes, and something he mentions too throughout the post is one of the core issues in people-pleasing syndrome is conflict avoidance, and this anxiety that builds up in us to avoid a conflict. I can tell you in my marriage to my ex-husband, that was a big part of the dynamic. I was not the type of people pleaser that was always volunteering at the school and was overflowing with things to do with extracurricular activities for my kids. There's a lot of parents that fall into that people-pleasing trap, where they're the parents who get suckered into always being the scout leader and always being the ball team coach and always volunteering at the school, or they're the room mother of the class every year and they're always helping out, and then the teachers and the administrators at the school or the people at the playground where the child plays sports, they pick up on the fact that this person is easily suckered into being the leader and helping out and giving extra time, and they will make this person feel obligated to always be there, always help out, and then it gets to the point where the person is so overbooked that they end up, like Mr. Finley so eloquently put, spreading themselves too thin. And then it's sort of self-sabotaging type of thing, because the people pleaser is wanting to make everybody happy, and then they end up spreading themselves too thin, and then they're not making anybody happy. In extreme cases, like in the case of like a person who gets suckered into extra projects and extra time at work, they will end up doing this to the detriment of their own family. They'll end up ignoring their own family because they feel obligated to do everything their job asks them to do, even if it's not mandatory. They'll say yes when they mean no, because they're so afraid of being perceived as not being a team player or not wanting to pull their weight. So that's one instance where that can happen. But in my own personal life, I can tell you it was mainly people pleasing my ex-husband to avoid the rage attacks, the temper tantrums, the yelling and screaming, the circular arguments that would go round and round for hours on end while the kids were in the next room and could hear everything that was being said. And so I would placate, I would please him, I would give him whatever he wanted, because I just didn't want to have to deal with the consequences, because I'm extremely conflict avoidant. So that was the core of my people-pleasing issues, is being afraid to have to deal with conflict, being afraid of having to stand up for myself. And definitely got myself trapped in a very unhealthy dynamic. Because a narcissist is just, they're just going to feed off of this. They're going to feed and take and take and take. And a lot of, people who are married to narcissists, definitely you get sucked into this trap that you think there's some way you can be, and then everything's going to settle and everything's going to be okay. We're finally going to be happy and can be normal. And you may even have some periods of normalcy where everything seems to be going okay. Well, you perceive it as normal because there's no explosions going on, but then after it's all said and done, when you take a step back and look, it's like, no, it wasn't okay. I was constantly having to give up, put my feelings, my needs to the side, in some situations even chunk my own core values and beliefs over the fence to keep this person from exploding and scaring myself and our children. That's not normal, and it's not healthy. And eventually you do. The people pleaser will eventually get to the point where they snap. Because you just get so mentally and physically exhausted, you can't take it anymore. Especially when you're dealing with manipulative people. And also, too, like he mentions how people-pleasing in itself can be selfish, because if you're excessively focused on, you have this comfort thing that you don't want to have to say no and deal with disappointing someone. So, oh my goodness, we got some really bad weather right now. I don't know if you could hear that, but the power just went out in my house. So luckily the battery is still working on my laptop, but the life on the battery is not going to last that long. So I may have to pause this and break it up into 2 parts. You definitely, where was I? Oh yeah. In a situation where a people pleaser, when you're dealing with another healthy individual, how it can be selfish is, you got this person, they're a decent person, they're not a manipulator, they just want, know, they may ask for help. Maybe it's another parent and you're both involved in the same activity with your kids, and they might be the leader and they may ask you to put in some extra time to help them out with something, and they're not trying to manipulate and they're not trying to be you know, like put their work off on you or anything. They genuinely need help and they're asking for it. And if you're already overbooked and then you say, yes, I'll do it, because you don't want to deal with the discomfort of saying no, then you're kind of putting them in a bad spot too, because then when you can't make it, and then you may not be as available as you made it seem you would be, then they end up having to pick up your slack, or at the last minute having to scramble and find somebody else to fill in where you said you would be there and then you can't because you've spread yourself too thin already. So that's where it can be selfish, because you've kind of put an inconvenience on them because of your personal discomfort with using the word no. So that's what he's talking about, like where it can actually become a selfish thing on the people pleaser's part. Sometimes you just gotta, like he said, just man up and say no when you mean no. And if somebody tries to manipulate you and guilt you into saying yes, well, those are the type of people that you need to just walk away from. And like I said, if you consistently assert your boundaries and say no when you mean no, and yes when you really mean yes, the manipulative people who are just out to use you are naturally going to start falling away from you, because it's going to be like a flashing warning sign that says, you know, healthy boundaries. This person can't be manipulated, and then they're just not going to waste any more of their time and they're going to move on to somebody else with weaker boundaries. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next article. I'm also going to link this this article as well in the description box, and I got this one off of psychcentral.com, and the title of this one is 21 Tips to Stop Being a People Pleaser. And this was written by Margarita Tartakovsky. People pleasers want everyone around them to be happy, and they will do whatever is asked of them to keep it that way. According to Susan Newman, PhD, a New Jersey-based social psychologist and author of the Book of No, 250 Ways to Say It and Mean It and Stop People Pleasing Forever. So that might be an interesting read to check out. They put everyone else before themselves, she said. For some, saying yes is a habit. For others, it's almost an addiction that makes them feel like they need to be needed. This makes them feel important and like they're contributing to someone else's life. People pleasers yearn for outside validation. Their personal feeling of security and self-confidence is based on getting the approval of others, said Linda Tillman, PhD, a clinical psychologist in Atlanta, Georgia, an assertiveness expert. Thus, at the core, people pleasers lack confidence, she said, which is, like I was saying, it's sort of the same root as narcissism. It's low self-esteem, and so they seek validation externally rather than seeking it from within themselves and listening to their own intuition. They worry how others will view them when they say no. People don't want to be seen as lazy, uncaring, selfish, or totally egocentric, Newman said. They fear they'll be disliked and cut from the group, whether it's friends, family, or co-workers. What many people pleasers don't realize is that people pleasing can have serious risks. Not only does it put a lot of pressure and stress on you, Newman said, but essentially you can make yourself sick from doing too much. If you're overcommitted, you probably get less sleep and get more anxious and upset. You're also depleting your energy resources. In the worst case scenario, you'll wake up and find yourself depressed because you're on such overload, because you possibly can't do it all, she said. There's a slew of strategies to help you stop being a people pleaser and finally say no. Number 1, realize you have a choice. People pleasers often feel like they have to say yes when someone asks for their help. Remember that you always have a choice to say no, Newman says. Number 2, set your priorities. Knowing your priorities and values helps you put the brakes on people pleasing. You know when you feel comfortable saying no or saying yes. Ask yourself, what are the most important things to me? Newman suggested. Number 3, stall. Whenever someone asks you for a favor, it's perfectly okay to say that you'll need to think about it. This gives you the opportunity to consider if you can commit to helping them. Also important is to ask the person for details about the commitment, because as we all know, manipulators will hide details and then suck you into something, and then you're only finding out about all the twists and turns and difficulty and complications that's involved in the situation, and then it ends up taking up way more of your time than what you had planned on, and then this is where you fall into the trap of spreading yourself too thin. Newman suggested asking yourself, how stressful is this going to be? Do I have the time to do this? What am I going to give up? How pressured am I going to feel? Am I going to be upset with this person who's asking? Asking yourself these questions is key because, as Newman said, very often after you've said yes or helped out, you're left wondering, what was I thinking? I neither have the time nor the expertise to help out. If the person needs an answer right away, your automatic answer can be no, Newman said. That's because once you say yes, you're stuck. By saying no automatically, you leave yourself an option to say yes later, if you've realized that you're available. And you've also gotten it off your must-do or don't want to do list. Set a time limit. This is number 4. If you do agree to help out, limit your time frame. Newman said, let the person know that I'm only available from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., for example. Number 5, consider if you're being manipulated, and this is very, very important, the most important. Sometimes people are clearly taking advantage of you, so it's important to watch out for manipulators and flatterers. Newman said, how do you spot them? She said, often the people who flatter you will say statements like, oh, you're so good at baking cakes. Would you make a cake for my child's birthday? Or, I don't know how to put this bookcase together, but you're so handy. Can you help me out? A classic line is, nobody does this better than you do, she said. Also, these people will either coax you into doing something or try to tell you what your availability is or what your time frame is. Basically, before you know it, they make the decision for you. Number 6, create a mantra. Figure out a mantra you can say to yourself to stop you from people pleasing. It can even be a visual, as simple as a big no, flashing when a certain friend who can always talk you into something approaches you, Newman says. Number 7, say no with conviction. The first no to anyone is always the hardest, Newman said. But once you get over that first bump, you'll be well on your way to getting off the yes treadmill. Also, remember that you're saying no for good reasons. You get time for yourself and for the people you really want to help, she said. Number 8, use an empathetic assertion. Some people initially think that being assertive means stepping all over people. Tillman said, instead, she explained that assertiveness is really about connection. Using an empathetic assertion means that you put yourself in the other person's shoes as you assert yourself. Tillman said, So you let the person know that you understand where they're coming from, but unfortunately, you can't help. People need to feel heard and understood, and this is a respectful way of asserting yourself and saying no. Number 9, consider if it's worth it. When asserting yourself, Tillman suggested asking yourself, is it really worth it? It's probably not worth it to tell your boss about his annoying habit, but it is worth it to tell your friend that you can't do lunch because you're super busy. Number 10, don't give a litany of excuses. It's tempting to want to defend your decision to say no to someone so they understand your reasoning, but this actually backfires. According to Newman, as soon as you start explaining, you give the other person lots of wiggle room to come back and say, oh, you can do that later. You can adjust your schedule. Or, that's not as important as what I'm asking.